All right, so today we're going to talk about my wrap up for February, all the things I read. I read 12 things. It's a little inflated, full disclosure. Finished two books that I primarily read most of in January, and they were big ones. And also, I read a fair few novellas. So I read more things, but it's not like I read more pages, I don't think. I will have on the screen how many pages I think I approximately read this month. As of right now, I don't really know the number. But let's get into the books. And I didn't do it last month, but normally when I read this many books, if I find books that I could group into like recommendation categories, I do things like that instead of from least to highest rating or order in which I read them. Neither of those styles of wrap up tend to work for me, at least in my head. It's very weird. I get very stressed. So today I actually have some relatively unique recommendation categories, and I was very surprised, but here we go. The first one, detective stories. Not a category I expected this month, and these are all actually fantasy detective stories. We'll start with the two that are by the same author. So this is P. Djeli Clark's Cairo series. So the first one is A Dead Djinn in Cairo. This was a reread for me. You follow, I think her name's Fatma. She is in 1920s Cairo, so it's alternative history. Actually, all of these are also alternative history fantasy. So many parallels, but this is a really cool like setting. So Cairo had this like portal open, so now there's this whole like intermingling of jinn and kind of angels and the common person. So magic is very much a part of it, and it makes Cairo kind of the center of the world in terms of power. But Fatma's just a detective. She's trying to solve the murder mystery of this jinn, and the plot goes from there. My issues with the story are more that detective stories can be hard for me. My enjoyment from that type of story comes from character interaction and relationships with their team. It's about how they solve the problem to me, not about what problem is happening or everything like that. And this story is like 40 pages. And like for me, there's just so much plot whiplash. Like I don't get a chance to breathe and understand how we have made these intuitive leaps. And I didn't get to know her that well. And I can tell she's a really cool character. So I'm excited because the novel for this series comes out in a couple months, and I know she's like the central character. But that's kind of why this is only an okay short story for me. But then I read The Haunting of Tramcar 015, and this is same world, kind of almost slightly after the events of this, so I would read them in order, because A Dead Djinn in Cairo does occur before The Haunting of Tramcar, although they're not that connected. This one, we have detectives solving the haunting of a tramcar, and I really like the detective duo in this one. It's not centered around Fatma. I can't remember the name of the duo, but it's really fun because it's kind of like older grumpy mentor and young aspiring youngin who has all of this energy. I love that pairing. I love that energy. I enjoyed that this is longer. It's like 140 pages, so you get to actually spend time watching them solve the case, and you do get those like little moments when you see their interaction, and we get to interact with this really cool setting. And in general, I enjoyed this experience a lot more. So I'm very excited to get to, I think it's Master of Jinn. That's, I think, released in May. I am unclear, but I do have an arc, so I'm planning to read it in the near future. And the last detective story actually was an arc I read, and it's coming out actually, when you're seeing this, it was released yesterday. And I do have a review, so we'll put that in the cards. Go look at it. Go check out this book that it was just released. It's a debut by Nicole Glover. It's The Conductors. This was my favorite of the detective stories that I read this month. And also alternative history. This is the late 1800s America, primarily Philadelphia. We are post-Civil War. And one of the main differences here that makes it alternative history is there's magic. So there's celestial magic for the Black community, and there's sorcery for the white community. This is arbitrary cultural lines. It's not based off any biology. One could learn the other if they so choose. This is just how things are done sort of thing. But this is really not a story about race. We're basically following Hetty and Benji, these two detectives who are solving murders in their community, and I loved it because, again, like I was alluding to earlier, I love detective stories where the team solving it, I get to follow those interactions and I get to be invested, and I love Hetty and Benji and everything that they do and how they think and how their relationship works. You do get flashbacks, so I do like using those flashbacks to help fill out this character dynamic. I really enjoyed the community, like I said in my review. The community at first was really hard for me to latch onto. Everything was happening kind of fast at the beginning, and I didn't feel that connected, but as it kept going, I really felt like I knew this neighborhood in Philadelphia. So I I really thought it was a very fun story. I do think the mystery elements are on the weaker side, but I don't read mysteries for the perfect, fulfilling mystery plot. Like I said, I more like those to be fun, engaging plots to facilitate me watching character interactions. And I predicted early on in a weekly update that I was like, I will really like this book and it will be a really great time if I really like these characters. And luckily, I loved Hetty. She is your primary point of view and she's phenomenal. I think she's so cool, and I think her character work is done really well because how she sees the world, you really are influenced by it in subtle ways, because I'd find myself being like, oh, I don't feel good about this person, but there's no reason why I shouldn't feel good about it other than Hetty thinks of them in this kind of way. So I really liked how that was worked. I really liked the focus on community. Like I said, I have a review, so I'll stop talking about it, but those were the alternative history fantasy detective stories that I read. That's a mouthful. I wonder what future Angela has put on the screen for me, but yeah, I read 3 stories like that. Now we will get into my kind of young child given way too much power category. These categories are really weird, but like they are themes that I saw between these stories and I couldn't not think of them. So the first one is The Prey of Gods by Nikki Drayden. Oh my goodness, is this book fun? Oh, I loved it. This is definitely like a sci fantasy. More heavily, I think, on the fantasy, although it's kind of in the future, so it has a lot of like robots and things like that, so that gives you kind of the sci-fi elements. It was recommended to me as like a future fantasy, and I do believe that's kind of what it is, because you are in South Africa and you are following multiple characters, and basically there's a lot of stuff happening. It's really hard to pinpoint the plot, but it felt like to me watching a new TV show. And I didn't know what was happening, but I was introduced to all these characters who are obviously leading all very different lives with different secrets, and there was a lot of crazy things happening, and I just wanted to know what was happening next. That was like the feeling I got. Things that there will be in this story. There is an AI civil war uprising. There's a hallucinatory drug that lets you get in touch with your god side kind of thing, like everyone's a little bit of a god. There are gods that are like trying to control the world and have their own vendettas. And like I said, this is a story that has a child who has way too much power and responsibility. That's one of our main point of views. And I buddy read this with Laura from a book circus, and we both had a blast. It's wacky, it's crazy, it's not a perfect story, but I had so much fun. It was exactly what I needed the week I read it, because it completely consumed me. I was always engaged when I pick it up. All the characters are incredibly morally gray in like the best ways, and it's really hard to figure out if you're rooting for or against someone, and if you're making morally good decisions in you're following that. Like if you're someone who likes people who are on like the chaotic evil to neutral spectrum of that D&D board, like yes, that is definitely here. And it has like really emotionally like compelling moments. There are consequences. It was a really great standalone story. Like I had a really fun time. And also I like the setting. I like that this was set in South Africa. It's important to note Nikki Drayden is a Texan. She's not from South Africa, and she mentions that in her acknowledgments that she went to South Africa as a kid or like maybe like a teenager for something, and she fell in love with the country, so she tried her best to, make this a love letter to this place that she went to on vacation. So it's not an Own Voices for the South African representation. But I think it's still a really fun book, and you should check it out. The next one is Remote Control by Nnedi Okorafor. I read this for my Patreon buddy read, so we're going to be talking about it this month in a couple weeks. So if you want to join in, it's not a long book. It's a very good book. You should join in because it's definitely going to have things for us to talk about. I'm thinking about maybe putting a review together, but after that discussion. But basically, this is also in that category of this kid has way too much power at such a young age, and that's all I'm really going to talk about. We're following this character, and she has this power, and this power makes people fear her and respect her, and that's the story. You start off with her kind of already at 13 or 14 years old, and you see how the world responds to her, and it takes place in Ghana, in kind of, I want to say near alternative future, because some of the technology is actually not dissimilar to what we have, but it's just different enough that it feels otherworldly. Like their TVs are like jelly TVs or something. Like it has like a different sort of visual for that. But it definitely has some sci-fi world building, but it's not focused on sci-fi elements. It's focused more on this girl with these powers, how she got to be where she is, and how is she handling that. This is my favorite Nnedi Okorafor that I've read so far. and I'm still processing the ending and the story in general. I think this was appropriate for a novella. I don't think I would have wanted it that much longer than what it is. And so if this was an anticipated release for you, you should pick it up. I think it's really interesting and pretty thought-provoking, but also like I said, this was my favorite to read. I really liked the writing style she used and the different sci-fi elements she put in and the introspection you get from this main character. The next one we'll talk about is kind of like space opera / kind of new favorites category because it works for both. We'll first start with The Best of All Possible Worlds by Karen Lord. Yes, I got this really pretty copy that I was talking to you guys about. It came in, it's perfect, it's beautiful. I love it so much. I have a review for this, so I'll try and be brief. But basically, if you like Becky Chambers, you need to try this book. It's really what I'll say, because it's very much that type of sci-fi that is, watch this team, this found family, travel and learn stuff for the sake of learning, and it's very optimistic sci-fi, it's very quiet sci-fi. It has one of the best character relationships I've ever explored. I love this book, and I love Karen Lord's writing. Like so much. Like I'm a Karen Lord fan, so it's obvious why this is like a new favorite for me. But I think it's the appropriate length. One of my complaints for some Becky Chambers books is that they're a little long for me for the amount of plot that is on page. This is only 300 pages, not 30. And I think that's the appropriate amount of space for this year-long journey. You are following this team for a year, travel to try and find a good home for this displaced culture. And I mean, it's a story that's basically the fallout of a very sad event, but like I said, handled with optimism. And it's about exploring cultures, which I think is a really fun way to have a sci-fi story. And I'm calling it space opera because it's not Our Planet Earth, and I think that counts. So that's what I'm calling it. The next one I also have a review for, and it just came out yesterday, and that is A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine. This is the second book in the Texkalan Empire series. I do believe this is the end of this storyline, but there might also be future novellas or other works in this world that she's built. This one's better than the first book for me. I was talking to some people that the first book is based on like a political intrigue, murder mystery plot. And that one's a really great story. I have a review for both A Memory Called Empire and A Desolation Called Peace. I like both of them quite a bit, but I think I like A Desolation Called Peace more because it focuses more on like military sci-fi, kind of almost First Contact-esque sci-fi tropes, which are like my favorite thing. And there are space kittens. I just think this one is better paced overall. I like that she incorporated multiple point of views because I do think having only one point of view for the first book was good, but I liked having more point of views in this one because it also improved on the world building for me. Getting to see the Empire in different parts of the world through different point of views just always helps me create a more complete picture. So I really appreciated that in the second book. Like in general, I really liked A Memory Called Empire, and I feel like A Desolation Called Peace did everything it could to make it an even better reading experience for me. I also buddy read this with Judith. Highly recommend buddy reading everything with Judith, honestly. She's just a great buddy reader. But this in particular, it was really fun where we were both just like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. You know, it could go down this route or it could go down this route. And we were kind of both wrong, but sometimes we were right. Like it was the right amount of predictability, but also just like the ending is just so it. I still like try and think about how I feel about the ending. I think I like the Memory Called Empire ending a bit more. I'm really unsure, but I liked the experience of A Desolation Called Peace more. Regardless, if you didn't like A Memory Called Empire, I would still check out A Desolation Called Peace, because if your issues were pacing related, like that's the key point. If your issues were based off pacing, I think that gets fixed. If your issues were based off the fact that you felt like Mahet was dry and you didn't have much character connection, I think that gets fixed with the multiple point of views. Now, if you had other issues, like the writing style itself, if you just hated the writing style, that does not change. It's still the same writing style. It still has the same vocabulary density that I talked about in my review for A Memory Called Empire, but it is so fun. The next category we'll talk about are just audiobooks that I consumed. So the first one is Lonesome Dove. I had been reading this book since December, and I finally finished it at the beginning of this month. Lonesome Dove is a much beloved historical fiction. It's about the West in America in the 1800s, like 1870s, 1880s, I want to say. I think, not now, I think it does a good job not glorifying this time period. I feel like a lot of Westerns glorify this portion of American history, and there's not really a lot to glorify. Like, the work itself, the labor of cattle ranging and everything like that, and pioneering is very difficult. And then there's the whole taking over other people's lands aspect that's not ideal. And there's a lot about the West that I feel is glorified that shouldn't be. So I think it does a good job with that. But like, as a story experience, as a consuming this for pleasure, I took way too long to read it because I really wasn't engaged. There were a few characters I really liked. Like, I liked Augustus and I liked Dietz. And I didn't hate Loretta, although she made some decisions I wasn't keen on. But my issues were pretty much started right when we got to part 2. And we started adding more characters, which I'm a fantasy reader. I'm usually okay if we keep adding point of views. I'm usually okay with really long books, but this 800-page historical fiction overstayed its welcome for me so hard. Like, it's just a little bloated. And the bloat I can pinpoint to those characters that were added in, because for me, what they added to the plot and the story was not much. Like, obviously, if they were your favorite characters, then it's awesome that they were in for you. But for me, the addition of that set of characters and how it added to the plot was really not that substantial. I would have much rather stayed with that outfit and the people who were traveling from Lonesome Dove to Montana. So that was one of the things. Like, I think it's fine. It's just honestly not a story that's really for me. I don't have any huge complaints. That's why I'm rating it like a 3 stars. It doesn't make me angry or anything. It's just, it wasn't my favorite story to consume, obviously. It took me over a month. So that was an audiobook I finished. And then I read Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan, and oh my goodness, the audio experience is going to help me get through The Wheel of Time. I still have issues with The Wheel of Time, but the audiobook helps me not be as annoyed with my issues, and it makes it so I can read it with less work. I have an issue with the writing style with Robert Jordan just being really hard for me to focus on. It's incredibly wordy and verbose for describing certain scenes, and it just doesn't click well with my brain. And so doing that with audio really helps remove the work so I can just enjoy the things that I do enjoy, like the magic system, like, you know, some of there are just plot elements that I do really enjoy. And, you know, I do like a whole, the world is ending, we need to figure out how to save the day plot. Like, that is the plot of Wheel of Time, you know? But there are some things that still annoy me, but I am excited to get payoff in the future. Like, I can see it. I can feel payoff. But it's an incredibly long process. Like, I do feel some characters have not developed in satisfying ways for me yet, but I can see it on the horizon. And also, I've pinpointed that a thing that will always, I think, prevent Wheel of Time from being like an all-time favorite series is that Robert Jordan does not give attention to character relationships in a way that I want him to. It's not that he ignores it, but there are some things that he puts off page that I want to be on page so badly. I'm like, no, that's the thing I find interesting. Why are you making me stay in this other scene that I find less interesting? And that's a preference thing. It's just, there are a lot of people acting in a vacuum, and I get to see a lot of people's individual perspectives, but I get very few moments when I just get like 3 people in a room talking and interacting about a situation. And when those moments happen, they're like my favorite things. But they don't happen quite often enough for me in this series. And I don't think that's something that he just focuses on as an author. So that just is what it is. The last books we'll talk about are in the powerful women in fantasy category, and we'll start off with my rereads. So I reread and finished, I read most of this in January, but I finished it in February, A Court of Wings and Ruin. Feyre is very powerful. Like her, hate her, she's an incredibly powerful female character. This is the 3rd book in A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's the 3rd book in a series. It's a fantasy romance series that I do really like. I like the 2nd book the most. I was rereading the 3rd one in anticipation of the 4th one, which I don't have my hands on yet, but I hear is amazing, so I'm pumped. The 3rd one's just too long. It really is just too long for what it is, and I've thought this every time I've read it, and never have I felt it more strongly than I do now. There's just like definitely things that could be pared down, so you could really just have what you want from the series. I also always have this issue with Sarah J. Maas books that I don't think she has appropriate consequences for the stakes that she puts in her stories, which makes endings for me a little bit Like, I'm not as letting myself get as emotionally into it because of just the habits she's had in the past with her books, if that makes sense. But this was also a reread, so like it also had that going against it. So it's not like my favorite book I've ever read by her. It was great enough for when I had nights where I just like could not focus on something new and I just needed to reread something that was familiar, so it was great for that. I also reread and finished The Winter of the Witch. I do have a should you read for this series, and the answer is yes. Maybe wait till next winter. I know we're approaching spring, but Vazia is very powerful. Well, I mean, Feyre, she's very powerful in that she's a fae, has lots of powers. Vazia is very powerful in that the patriarchy will not bring her down. And I love her so much. I love her need to be independent and forge her own path. And how she balances that with her need to care for and love her family and her country. Vazia is one of my top female characters ever. So yeah, this is the Bear and the Nightingale Winter Night Trilogy series. Like I said, I have a should you read. This is the third book. This is my favorite book in the series. I can't really talk about the plot of it, but it's really cool. I will say, for people who are like, I don't know if I can start the series, I'm a little behind. This book actually primarily takes place in summer. So like, you know, if you've already read the first two or the first one and you were like, I don't know, it's still kind of winter. Like the second book's kind of winter if you want that atmosphere, but this is actually kind of more summer. So I'm just saying, you know, just pushing, read the book. And another thing I was thinking about is if you have read Bear and the Nightingale or you're worried about reading that and then taking a break, The Girl in the Tower, now that I've reread it, does kind of summarize what happened in Bear and the Nightingale pretty early on. So if you had taken a long break, it's pretty easy to get back into it. So that's what I'll say about that trilogy. And the last book we're talking about today has Maggie, who is incredibly powerful, and that's in Storm of Locusts. This book I did not like as much as Trail of Lightning, primarily because I love Trail of Lightning because of a character dynamic that is missing from this book because of plot reasons. And I'm being vague because I don't want to spoil anything. This still has that post-apocalyptic fantasy world. It still has Maggie the monster hunter with clan abilities. This does have found family components that I really like. The quest in this one is, in my opinion, more interesting than Trail of Lightning, but I was really here for the character dynamics. Like if you've watched my bookish preferences video lately, if you've heard me talk in any reviews recently, I am so big on character relationships and interactions, it's not even funny. And that just didn't quite come through as strong in this as in Trail of Lightning, but I still really liked it, and I'm really pumped for whenever the third book comes out in this series. It's still really fun, still highly recommend, especially if you just want a quick, like plot-based story in a really compelling setting with Maggie, who is awesome. Like these are both, I think, about 300 pages, so really not that much of a time commitment, and I think are really great fun stories. So those are the 12 things I read this month. I am pretty happy with myself. I definitely loved a lot of things. I mean, I for sure had things that weren't clicking as much with me, but when I loved something, I loved it, and it was the best feeling. Like, hands down, the biggest surprise of the month. The Best of All Possible Worlds. I've been meaning to read this for months, and I just hadn't, and I picked it up. I couldn't put it down, and it's so great. It's so great, and I'm so glad I was able to get this cover, because I think it's so pretty. Like, look at those, the galaxy. Ah, so good. But what was your biggest surprise of February? You know, how did you do? Did you meet any of your goals, or are you just like, February is a month? It's a struggle, because that's honestly usually where I'm at. And honestly, it was a struggle, but books were my salvation. And if you want to just leave me an emoji, you can leave me a heart of your choice, because February, you know, month of love and all of that. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.